Perfect. Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. For those of you who don't know us, we are Judicium Education. We are a support services company that covers off legal and consultancy support across 4 key main areas. They are GDPR, governance and clerking, HR and employment law, and of course health and safety. So thank you for joining us. I know health and safety at the moment is kind of at the forefront of all of our minds as we are preparing to either reopen or introduce more students back into the school environment. So I know there's been lots of questions up for you over the next couple of days. So what we'll do today is cover off some of the key areas that we kind of added for you to choose from. So they will be things such as kind of PPE and social distancing and kind of isolation rooms in schools. We'll be doing kind of site team and building maintenance and things like that, just to kind of make sure everything is ticking over nicely. But I'm going to introduce you to Sarah, who is our expert on the sofa today. Sarah, do you want to kind of say hello and tell everybody kind of who you are and what you do?
Yes, hello. Good morning, everyone. So my name is Sarah Crouch. I am a consultant for Judicium as well as a trainer. So here with 2 hats on today, spreading information as well as your consultant. And just as Tara was saying, everything at the moment has been slightly thrown up in the air. I'm aware that everyone's had an absolute tidal wave of information over the last few weeks. So what we're hoping to do is help you see the wood for the trees of just prioritising. All of our usual health, safety and fire and welfare principles still apply, so grounding ourselves with all the new information we've gained as well. All right, and then as we say, we'll go through several specific areas that we can focus on for you.
Perfect, thank you, Sarah. And I'm actually just going to launch a very quick poll on your screens. This is just going to give Sarah an idea of kind of where you are at the moment and kind of any restrictions that may come up just in terms of kind of staffing and things. Sarah, while those kind of results are flying in, which they are nice and quickly, so thank you everybody, do you maybe just want to start us off on kind of building maintenance as a whole and what areas people should be mindful of and things at this time?
Yeah, of course. And one area that we wanted to just almost have a bit of a refresher, potentially a lot of you have already done this already, but just the staff assessments and numbers side of things. And this is what leads us into talking about your building cover, as it were. Just getting an idea of the groups of staff you have, of who is isolating, who needs to shield, who can return to work, but then within that group, who will still be home working. Let's not forget the people who are still there, and also whether people will need reasonable adjustments to be able to return to work under these circumstances, because not all of the new controls we'll be putting in will work for everyone off the bat, and we need to be flexible for any individual risk assessments, etc. And then we'll lead into where we're talking about premises cover. We are talking about not just unlocking and locking, that's what everyone thinks of your premises managers for, but the whole building. So whether you've been mothballed and you've actually been closed completely for a while, whether you've been running a minimal service, or whether you've been functioning normally, just looking to make sure we've got our maintenance programme ticking over. So I don't know if everyone's answered.
Yes, they have. So on your screen now, just so everybody can see. So quite a nice split actually at the moment. So yeah,
that's good.
Let's kind of maybe go through some of the things that people, you know, should have an idea of that obviously premises staff are doing every week and things, just to be mindful in case this situation does come up.
Yeah, exactly that. And I'm conscious also we are talking in broad terms, because we will have a mixture for yourselves here of people who have single premises staff, premises teams, and everything in between. So what we want to work out is what works for you. And then the main priority areas. The biggest conversation that's come out of all the revised guidance and the hot topics coming through relate to Legionella control. So again, as I said before, if you have a building that's been closed for a long period of time, that is now a red flag for you. Before reopening the building, we need to make sure that our water management risk assessment has been reviewed, that the building itself, the water system has been flushed through and where needed disinfected as well. You may have routine contractors that come in to do that for you, and then area testing as well, just to test the water samples. Where you've been running for a while, and you manage to keep things ticking over, then we can keep things going, but thinking about who would do that if your premises staff aren't available for whatever reason. Things like your weekly flushing routines for little used outlets, that's your showers, sinks that aren't used often, and an area that's been discussed recently is water fountains. We've had quite a few people realise either you've got a fork in the road discussion to have, that you will keep using them, but they're a contact surface for transmission, so we need to up the cleaning and the segregation on those, or we close them down where you then have a dead leg. So then water fountains or bottle filling points that are closed down will need to go on your weekly flushing routines. All right, so it's thinking about capacity. Who can take on these roles? Will you consider temporary staff, contractors, or would it fall to someone within your immediate team? And then after Legionella has been reviewed, fire is one of our biggest points that hasn't changed. All our same principles and routines ticking over. So fire alarm and emergency light testing, so local testing, weekly core point tests and monthly emergency light tests, but also your servicing. Make sure your appointed contractors are still on the books, clarifying whether they're happy to come in or not. You may need to find alternatives, but making sure the servicing has been completed so you know all your systems are functioning fully, and then we can start going into a cover plan. Should someone be off who usually deals with the fire alarm, for example, is there an overview? Is there a folder someone else can grab to know what they need to do on a weekly basis? Or if the alarm faults and goes off and we need to work out how to switch it off, all those little things, but thinking about your cover for teamwork. And then your routine maintenance and servicing as well. So again, splitting it between whether you've got a building that has been closed for an extended period or whether you've been ticking over, we need to think about the routine and the statutory maintenance that has to continue. Gas servicing, your electrical testing, everything that goes in between for plant. If you are powering back up boilers, for example, that have been asleep for quite a while, we need to do that safely. So looking at knowing which contractors apply to which services, and then who to contact when are they due. The powers that be, the enforcing agencies, have all been very clear that whilst they'll be pragmatic when looking at any situations that occur in this period, the enforcement element is still there. And that's the HSE, the fire service, and everyone in between. They have been very clear that all the statutory requirements still apply, and we need to make sure that they're ticking over on that side. The other element I just wanted to add also on equipment servicing, particularly as now we're looking at reopening kitchens, is your local extraction ventilation, your extraction systems, making sure that they are, again, fully functioning. We're getting into hot weather, so we need to make sure that air cycle is happening. But also your TR19, your deep clean, degreasing of the ducting, etc. Knowing who does it. Is it your kitchen contractors, your actual servers, or is it a separate company? And making sure all of that is done, just like it's the end of summer holidays. Everything's been serviced and is all good, and before we open the building. All right. And the other two areas I wanted to quickly mention in terms of cover. Not specifically premises staff, but quite often they take a lead on fire wardens as well. So where you've had your staff assessment to know who's coming back in, how do those numbers relate to what fire wardens you will have on site and where they are, but also first aiders. Do you have paediatrics where you need them, but also first aid at work trained for adults? And do we have a good distribution of people around on both sides? Thinking about how the use of your building has changed and the space has changed. And then looking at what numbers do we need to actually get extra covering. And we have had the question in the last week of if I haven't got enough first aiders, what do I do? Because we can't do face-to-face training at the moment. There is an understanding that in the interim online training can be considered. And for fire wardens, we can provide that as well. But we do recommend that you double check with your insurers to make sure they're happy with your new arrangements.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sarah. I know that obviously there is a lot to kind of take in terms of kind of just maintenance in general. I think one thing that's definitely come up this week for us as a company, and it's been kind of a repeat question, is obviously just around social distancing and having obviously smaller groups of people spread out obviously across potentially the whole building. And obviously what that means for secondary schools is you may have obviously your whole entire school open, all the classrooms being utilised by smaller groups. So actually, in terms of that fire warden area, is this something that maybe we potentially look at just doing sweeps with other members of staff, even though, you know, they're not necessarily fire wardens, but especially if we're working on a rota system and we've only got certain staff members in maybe 2 days a week. I think it's just something that, you know, definitely Sarah and her team have been kind of advising on, that actually it's really good for everybody to have that training now and everybody to know their areas, because it changes every day, doesn't it, kind of with what staff members are in and what staff members potentially may need to isolate. So I think just giving that a good background check for everybody to have some good understanding is kind of a good key area. Sarah, on the first aid, I know something that this may lead us into the next area of kind of PPE and the wonderful world that is that we've had quite a few questions just on administering first aid and kind of how we do that and kind of what PPE requirements that has and whether that's changed. Do you kind of maybe want to talk to us a little bit about, yeah, just first aid and PPE in general?
Yes, of course. So I think it's one that has, I would say, almost hasn't changed, but we have new principles to apply within that remit. I'm conscious this is an area for a lot of people, of just managing expectations of what's going to happen. This is something that will be defined in your specific documentation. So 2 key areas you need to make sure that you have is a risk assessment that includes these kind of activities, issuing first aid, dealing with someone who has symptoms of COVID, or it might be general intimate care. It's not first aid, but you have SEM provisions or similar where intimate care is needed. So your risk assessment will set out the activities and required control measures. And just as you were saying, Tara, linking across to the first aiders, a first aids needs assessment. Now that needs assessment will define how many people you have available, how many trained staff, and then how they will work across your building in terms of medicines and first aid and everything between. So 2 key areas. And then in terms of actually delivering first aid, one thing that has come out for the guidance, and particularly guidance from St John's and Red Cross, etc., very good websites to be going on. There is specific instructional posters and videos for giving CPR in the current circumstances, because you do need to change how you approach that. If you are giving really low level first aid, that whilst you break the 2-meter rule, it's very short-lived, etc. For example, popping on a plaster, that kind of thing, then disposable gloves are fine. That's kind of a standing minimum. If you have to sustain close contact with someone, again, I'm talking about dealing with high levels of first aid, but also this intimate care, it could be part of your day-to-day duties, then your risk assessment will define the PPE that you should be having access to. That's disposable gloves, disposable aprons, and that's the starting point. If you are in a position where you may be exposed to any kind of bodily fluid, but particularly saliva, so we've got droplets from coughing or vomiting, etc., then that's when we look at face protection. So we're looking at masks, goggles, or face shields, whichever it is defined as suitable for the particular task. Again, I'll give a general overview because you'll have your own specifics, but making sure that you've got those graded approaches. So if you are someone who delivers that level of intimate care anyway, you should have this in your standard risk assessment. We are now adding in where someone, for example, a first aider or a member of staff, then has a new area to consider, as it were, of assisting someone with exhibiting symptoms of COVID during the day. I'd separate that slightly out from standard first aid, kind of giving first aid. If you're dealing with someone with symptoms, we first of all, the person assisting them should maintain 2 meters as a rule. If they can't, then that's the gloves and aprons scenario. Escorting them to your area for isolation. So recommendations are you have a room that's designated as your isolation room, separate if you can to your first aid room, so you don't lose your first aid room. But having an isolation room, so then that person is away from the main populace until they can leave sight. All right. And again, if they are exhibiting extreme symptoms, say persistent coughing, etc., then the person assisting them should have face coverings as suitable. When that person has left the isolation room, or as you would for standard first aid, once they've left the first aid area, we then have clean-up. So for general first aid, you'll follow your usual protocols, as in your first aid policy and your medicines policy. With the isolation room where someone has exhibited symptoms, we have to have a higher degree of infection control. All right. So all of your disposable PPE goes in a double-bagged waste bin. And then the person who is tasked with cleaning the area, standard disinfectants that are suitable for enveloped viruses, that's our key phrase. They will have disposable gloves, aprons, face shield if there is visible contamination in the room. And then they will have disposable mop heads or paper towels, whichever is suitable. They will use the disinfectants to clean all hard surfaces. And then all of that waste is contained in a double-bagged waste bag for 72 hours, secured away. All right, so it's a split between standard first aid hasn't really changed unless you have to sustain intimate care or break the 2-metre rule for an extended period of time. But there are specific requirements of dealing with someone with COVID symptoms.
Perfect, thank you, Sarah. And I've actually got a poll just on kind of isolation rooms and things. So if you wouldn't mind just taking a moment to answer the question. Again, Sarah, just while those results are obviously kind of ping in, so many already have said yes, which is giving me, making me very happy indeed. Just one thing that I know we've had a couple of questions on in terms of isolation rooms. I know that we've mentioned about keeping them separate, obviously from first aid rooms, so that you've always got 2 rooms available, is kind of about what those rooms actually have inside them. So I know we've got lots of kind of broom cupboards and things, especially if we're in older school buildings, that have kind of got heavy curtains, or there's lots of kind of files and things shoved at the back. Would this be something that people should be mindful of, just what's in there, just for kind of ease of cleaning and things? Do you maybe want to talk us through kind of an isolation room and stuff in general?
Yes, of course. I think, again, it's one of those principles that it sounds very different, but it's the same principles as your first aid room. And for fear of too early in the day to get very graphic, it's always got to be easy to clean. And that's our fundamental thing. So if you're utilising somewhere that is not usually a waiting space or something like that, we need to look at soft furnishings. Exactly as Tara was saying, document storage or curtains and blinds or whatever it is that you have in there, anything that's a soft surface, then we need to try and get rid of them as much as possible. All right, because what we need to think of, if we then have someone in there with symptoms and we have to clean the room, anything that's absorbent is going to be much harder to clean. You can arrange, if you have no choice and have no wipe down friendly furniture, you can steam clean soft furnishings should you so wish, but again, it is labour intensive, so try and avoid it as much as we can. Thinking about space, hopefully we will not have a sudden rush of people. It will be individuals on a case-by-case basis. So chair for people to sit down because they may feel faint or worried, but also potentially table and water supply, just so they've got some fundamentals there for them. But the main focus is as much space as you can provide, but we know this is a temporary arrangement, so it doesn't have to be a specialist setup, and the focus is on hygiene. So if you, as I say, if you can, as many hard surfaces and lack of remove all your soft furnishings as much as you can, but also access to hand gel or a sink with soap, that's always preferable, but either or, so we can have the hand washing in there if possible. And then a lidded bin. That's one of the important things. Should the person have a cough or sneezes or whatever it is, and they are going through tissues, etc., then making sure you've got a covered bin that we can get everything out of reach and out of sight as soon as possible is important as well.
Perfect, Sarah. And a really good question's actually just come in, and I know there's been lots of questions just around kind of rooms in general and classroom usage and how we kind of structurally, in terms of logistics, which I know has been kind of impossible for everybody over the last couple of weeks. But the question that's just come in that is, would it be appropriate to move other staff and pupils out of the area to a spare classroom rather than moving the individual with symptoms through the building to the isolation room?
That's a good point, and it would literally be a local decision on your part. So the guidance says that anyone who exhibits symptoms should be isolated from the main population. So it's kind of a go-to that, because you don't know how long they are going to be still on your site, in your building, until they get to go home, go for testing, etc. The idea has formed around an isolation room or space, but not everyone has that. So if you do have spare space to move everyone else out, great. All the same principles apply in terms of if that person stays in the classroom area, all of that still needs to be washed down. I think one of the thoughts behind an isolation space is it's more of a controlled area, but that is something that you can certainly look at. It's logistics for yourselves, and whether you can spare, if you have that spare teaching space that you can move people between. That's the fundamental one.
Yeah, and I think a lot of schools have been kind of putting this in as a provision, haven't they? Because obviously if one classroom, there's been maybe a pupil or a staff member that's exhibited symptoms, then we need to do a full clean of that classroom. We need to look at the rest of the children. Are they going to be home? Are they going to have to isolate? So it's almost handy, isn't it, having that spare room, that spare classroom, if we can, so that we've always got maybe one floating room that obviously we can look to move people around. Another question that's just come in, Sarah, is, do all rooms need to have a lidded bin? And this is something that came up a couple of weeks ago, especially around hay fever. I'm a terrible sufferer, so obviously I'm kind of sneezing and things all the time. So yeah, where's our stand on that?
Yeah, that's a fair point as well. And I think, so the guidance as it stands at the moment is where you can have lidded bins. And this is purely for kind of waste containment. What we just need to think about is lidded bins in a general term. To me, that creates more hand touching transmission surfaces. So we need to think how we put that into place. And I'm conscious that I've already had several clients reporting back that certain supply lines are starting to wobble a little bit. So being aware of, you may have to be inventive of where we look to get bins, etc. But if you can, pedal bins are fantastic, because that just takes your hands out of the remit, and you can manage it a lot more. If you can't get those, which I'm aware a few people have said they just fundamentally can't, then yeah, standard lidded bins, but we need to have those wipes or sprays just to wipe down things on occasion. It's that the same common sense approach to any surface that people are going to touch regularly. We just need to up the ante on cleaning it a bit, but also make sure you've got regular waste collection as well, so you're getting the bags out of there quick and that kind of thing.
Perfect. And a question that was submitted beforehand for today's session, Sarah, was just around fire doors. And I know this is a very kind of interesting topic for us internally, but just around, is it okay to prop open fire doors now? Because obviously there's going to be a lot more physical contact with obviously people pushing open doors and things. What's our standpoint on that?
Yeah, I think this has caused quite a, I would say, confusion, because the guidance has a wonderful bracket that says where appropriate in terms of fire management. It has been made very clear, particularly by the enforcing authorities and the fire service again, that the principles for fire door management have not changed. What I'm conscious of is the language has got crossed over. So where we're talking about internal doors, be they classroom, corridor, or similar plant room doors that are fire doors, rated fire doors. When people say propped open, that puts the fear of what's into us, I will be honest. We should not be using door stops, fire extinguishers, chairs, whatever it is, or your new lidded bins to prop open the fire doors. You cannot prop them open in a situation where we rely on someone to close them on evacuation, because if they are panicked or they have a personal situation, they could forget, and then our fire break's gone. So what we're looking for is, as I say, same principles as this time last year. Your fire doors need to have a self-closing device on them, so they will close no matter what. Now, in terms of holding them open, I nearly said propped, holding them open, there are formal devices that you can get. Either they fix to the floor, or they fix to the wall, and they have a magnet that holds the door open until the fire alarm activates, and that sound then activates and releases the magnet and the door shuts. So we take the human element out of it. I think that's the important thing to emphasize. You can go all out, and I think it's a long-term project, fantastic. You can get hardwired holdback devices that actually wire into your fire alarm system. But the lower end of the spectrum are the battery powered self-contained units, either, as I say, floor or wall mounted. They can be fitted to predominantly corridor doors, but also classroom doors on occasion, and then they will release when you need them. But it has been made clear, propping any fire door with a self-closer open with something like a door stop or something like, or hooking them open if you're in an old building, the hooks at the back, that's a no-no still.
Perfect, thank you. And just a kind of a last final point, I think for me, kind of on fire, it's been one of the biggest things that we've been discussing. People are in a different headspace, aren't they now, Sarah? So obviously if a fire alarm is going to go off, people are going to respond differently. We've had lots of questions around, do I follow a normal evacuation process? Does it matter if the students break the 2-meter rule when trying to evacuate for a fire? And I know obviously we always stand a safeguarding kind of trumps everything rule. And, you know, in that case, you know, we just want people out of the building. If you're only occupying half the building, it potentially is worth closing off some certain fire exits and just making sure that staff only know to maybe use 2, rather than having people carted through the building and kind of people don't know kind of what that evacuation process looks like. So I think it's going back to Sarah's point earlier and things of just, can everybody have some training? Can everybody know what the kind of the new steps and rules are? Because people will panic and they will respond differently to kind of how they normally would, and all kind of bumble out together through what kind of one main exit. And we had a question, Sarah, just on social distancing in the playground, kind of around evacuation, or just in general, and whether bubble groups can kind of stay in their bubble groups kind of in that evacuation and things like that. Do you have anything just to kind of chat us through, just to kind of finalise today's session?
Yeah, of course. So I think splitting it out there, yes, so general playground use versus evac and assembly points or muster points if you're that way inclined. For general playground use, definitely the provisions and the guidance still go around the now infamous phrase of bubbles, that children stay in their bubbles, and it might be, again, depending on your space and the equipment you have, that you either divide the space out so everyone has their own area that they can go to. I've had some clients that are saying that where they've got some kind of plain play space versus equipment, they're splitting those between the bubbles, the groups. But then if equipment is staying in play, then we need to make sure we've got clean down time for that as well. Some people have gone before and after. I think after is one of the good additions you can do, but who's going to clean it? What are we going to use? That kind of thing we need to think about. So splitting your play areas suitably is the main focus to help them keep distancing. In terms of evacuation, I think this is one where we have risked in conversation almost over egging the pudding. Again, same common sense approach. If there is a real fire, we get out the building. We are not going to say, no, bubble B has to go first, etc., etc. We get out and we get safe. What you will need to think, exactly as Tara was saying, the use of your building is changing and where you are. You might find that people who are familiar with being in West Wing are now in East Wing, etc. So what we need to think about is, does your evacuation plan as it stood this time last year still apply? Do we need to revamp it? So we may even strip it back. We usually have 3 assembly points. Actually, we've got enough people, but not enough for all of them. So we're going to have 1 assembly point. Everyone goes there. Just review what your previous plans were and see if they work. So we need to know how the new bubbles work with assembly points, making sure everyone is clear. But this is where we were saying at the beginning, excuse me, fire wardens play a key role in this point, because everyone will be in a different mindset. They will be worried and anxious anyway, and our job is to relieve those tensions, reassure them everything is okay, you follow procedure, you get yourself out into the fresh air, and then we'll stay in the bubbles and we'll be fine.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm just going to squeeze in one last question that's just popped in the chat box just before we close up. So this is just around, if I can find it, there we go. Is there any specific guidance on mask provision? So does it have a certain rating, etc., that, you know, schools can be mindful of and have a look out for, so that they're not obviously purchasing things that are not good for use.
Yeah, fair enough. The short answer is yes, and it does depend. Again, I'll give a broad answer because it does depend on the activities you're looking at. So if we go back to our conversation about someone who would be dealing with, say, for example, general low-level first aid, but has to be with someone close for a little while, then a standard, the thin pleated masks that are moisture resistant, they are suitable. If you are with someone with symptoms, or you are carrying out the cleaning of a space where someone with symptoms has been and there's visible contamination, that's when we need the upgraded masks. Now, there is a good page on the HSE's website, hse.gov.uk. If you put in RPE under COVID-19, RPE is respiratory protective equipment, subcategory of PPE, just to confuse everything, but they have a reviewed RPE page that covers everything you need on mask fitting, face fit testing, also disposal, because that's the other thing you need to remember. We have to dispose of them and take them off correctly without touching our faces, etc. But the FFP2 is the suggested, the recommended level of filter that you have for close contact, intimate care, and people with symptoms at the moment. But as I say, HSE, there is specific guidance, and also going back to the gov.uk guidance that is covering everything, there is a particular page called Cleaning in Non-Healthcare Settings that also gives you a rundown of what you need.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank all of you for submitting questions before today's session and obviously during. I hope that there has been some useful tips for you all to take away. We will be hosting obviously lots more sessions for you, and if you have any questions at all, you know, my email address is tara.jones@judicium.com. Obviously this session will be available to rewatch if you've missed anything on the ISBL site and also on their YouTube. So please feel free to obviously connect and rewatch back if you did miss anything. But it's been a pleasure speaking with you all, and hopefully you have a lovely afternoon and take care, especially over the next upcoming weeks, and we hope to see you all again soon. All right, take care. Bye.